Black veteran returned to childhood home after 15 years. Then his dog found a secret door in the basement. The cold was a living thing in the old farmhouse. It seeped through the window frames, crept up through the floorboards, and settled deep in Marcus's bones. A chill that had nothing to do with the Michigan winter raging outside. For 15 years, the desert sun had baked that kind of cold out of him. But now, back in the hollowed-out shell of his childhood, it had returned with a vengeance. He sat at the kitchen table, his breath a pale ghost in the air, his gaze fixed on the single, flickering bulb that hung from a frayed wire overhead. It was the only light working in the house, and its struggle against the encroaching darkness felt like a mirror to his own. His worn hands, scarred from service and calloused from futile attempts to patch the dying house, were wrapped around a mug of lukewarm water. There was no coffee left. There was, in fact, almost nothing left. A half-empty bag of kibble for Buster, his aging retriever mix, and 3 cans of beans in the pantry. Outside, the wind howled a mournful song, piling snow against the door and windows, isolating him completely. The foreclosure notice on the table, weighted down by an empty sugar bowl, was a stark white tombstone marking the death of his last hope. He had come home to heal, to find a piece of the peace he'd lost somewhere in the sand. But all he'd found was the final, crumbling act of his family's quiet decline. His parents were gone, the farm had failed long ago, and now the bank, in the form of a man named Gable with a smile like a razor, was coming to take the very ground beneath his feet. Buster whined softly from his spot by the cold hearth, nudging his head against Marcus's leg. Marcus reached down and stroked the dog's soft ears. The simple contact a small anchor in a sea of desperation. It was for Buster that he kept fighting, kept stoking the pathetic fire in the wood stove with scavenged branches. It was for this loyal, gentle soul that he endured the quiet judgment of the town, the whispers that followed the black veteran who couldn't keep his family's legacy alive. Then, through the shriek of the wind, came a different sound. A sputtering, mechanical cough, followed by a loud, percussive bang that echoed across the frozen fields. Marcus stiffened. No one should be out on these roads, not in this blizzard. He moved to the window, rubbing a clear circle on the frosted pane. 2 powerful headlights cut through the swirling snow, illuminating a scene of trouble. A group of men, burly silhouettes against the whiteout, were gathered around a stalled van and several motorcycles that looked utterly defeated by the weather. They wore thick leather cuts, the insignia on their backs obscured by the snow. The town's fear was instant and reflexive. Men like that, on bikes like that, meant nothing but trouble. Marcus felt the old instinct, the ingrained caution. Lock the door. Douse the light. Pretend no one is home. It was the logical thing to do. It was the safe thing to do. But then he saw one of them stumble, his form swallowed by the blizzard for a moment before his companions pulled him back up. They were freezing. They were stranded. And his home, however broken, had a roof. His integrity, tested by war and poverty, faced a new, simpler battle against the cold pragmatism of fear. He let the curtain fall. The image of the struggling men burned into his mind. He looked at the last few logs by the stove, at the meager cans in his pantry, at the foreclosure notice that declared him a man with nothing to lose because he had already lost it all. But he hadn't lost everything. He hadn't lost the core of the man his father had raised him to be. With a sigh that surrendered not to despair but to decision, Marcus pulled on his worn boots, grabbed his heavy coat, and walked to the door. He would not let men freeze to death on his doorstep, no matter who they were. The wind tore at him the moment he opened the door, a physical blow of ice and fury. He leaned into it, pulling his collar high, and shouted into the gale. "Hey! You need shelter." The figures turned, their movements stiff with cold. One of them, a broad-shouldered man with a thick, graying beard, trudged toward him, his face a mask of suspicion and exhaustion. "Our van's dead." Generator gave out. His voice was a low rumble, rough as gravel. "I've got a barn," Marcus yelled over the wind. "It's not warm, but it's dry and out of this. You can wait out the storm there." The man's eyes, sharp and intelligent, assessed him in a quick, sweeping glance that took in his worn clothes, his dark skin, and the crumbling porch. He saw the quiet dignity in Marcus's posture, the exhaustion in his face that matched their own. After a long moment, he gave a curt nod. "We'd be grateful." He turned and relayed the offer. Slowly, cautiously, the group of 6 men abandoned their vehicles and followed Marcus. They moved with a heavy, weary rhythm, their leather creaking. As they shuffled into the relative quiet of the barn, stomping snow from their boots, Marcus saw the patch on their jackets clearly for the first time. A stylized iron shield flanked by wings, with the words Iron Sentinels MC stitched above it. An outlaw motorcycle club, the town's worst fears made flesh. He felt a fresh tremor of apprehension, but it was too late now. He had made his choice. Inside the barn, the air was still and frigid, smelling of old hay and engine oil. The men huddled together, their faces raw from the wind. Marcus saw that one of the younger ones was shivering violently, his lips tinged with blue. Without a word, Marcus left and returned a moment later with a stack of old horse blankets from a dusty tack room. He handed them out, his movements calm and deliberate. Then he went back to the house, returning with the last of his firewood and a small, dented kettle. He started a fire in the barn's old potbelly stove, the one his father had used for winter projects. The small flame was a fragile promise against the oppressive cold. "I don't have much," Marcus said, his voice quiet in the suddenly intimate space. "But I'll make some tea. It's hot, at least." The leader, who the others called Preacher, watched him with an unreadable expression. "You didn't have to do this, man. We saw the notice on your door from the road." Marcus just shrugged, not wanting to discuss the paper that was suffocating his life. No one deserves to freeze. He noticed the pale, shivering biker was favoring his arm. "You hurt." The young man shook his head, too proud to admit it, but Preacher answered for him. "Took a spill on the ice before the van died. Wrist is banged up." Marcus's training kicked in. "Let me see." He gently took the man's arm, his touch surprisingly sure. He prodded the swelling wrist with practiced fingers. "It's not broken, but it's a bad sprain. I'll wrap it." He disappeared into the house again, returning with the small first aid kit from his army days and using the last of his athletic tape to fashion a competent splint. As he worked, a silence fell over the barn, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the howl of the wind outside. The bikers, men who projected an aura of impenetrable toughness, watched the stranger tend to their brother with a quiet, selfless focus. They saw the threadbare cuffs of his coat, the deep-set weariness in his eyes, and the unwavering decency of his actions. When he was done, Marcus stood up. He had one more thing to share. He returned from the house a final time holding his last 3 cans of beans and a can opener. He set them by the fire. "It's all I've got," he said, a statement of simple, unadorned fact. "But you're welcome to it." Preacher looked from the cans to Marcus's face, and for the first time, the hard suspicion in his eyes softened into something else, something akin to awe. He picked up one of the cans, his gaze lingering on the worn label. "We won't forget this," he said, his voice low and heavy with meaning. Later, as the men ate the beans, huddled near the growing warmth of the stove, Preacher walked over to where Marcus was checking on an old tractor. He stopped near a dusty workbench, his eyes falling on a faded, framed photograph hanging from a nail. It showed a young soldier in an older uniform, his arm around Marcus's mother. The soldier had Marcus's eyes. "Your father?" Preacher asked. "Yeah. He passed 5 years back. Army man, too. Vietnam." Preacher stared at the photograph for a long time, his expression unreadable. He seemed to be connecting dots only he could see, his mind working behind the wall of his stoic face. The small gesture, the focused attention, felt significant, a tiny shift in the atmosphere. Before the storm broke the next morning, as the sentinels prepared to leave, Preacher pressed a heavy, strange-looking coin into Marcus's palm. It was iron, stamped with the same shield as their jackets. "A marker," Preacher said, "for the kindness." We pay our debts. Marcus looked at the coin, then at the man. He didn't understand, but he nodded. He watched them rig their van and roar away, their engines a receding promise or a threat. He wasn't sure which. He was just a man in a falling-down house, a little colder and a little hungrier than he was the day before. The thaw came 2 weeks later, not as a gentle spring but as a grim, gray melt that turned the world to mud. With it came Mr. Gable. He parked his gleaming sedan right in the middle of the muddy drive, stepping out in polished shoes that he clearly resented dirtying. He held a clipboard like a weapon, his smile thin and predatory. "Marcus," he said, the name sounding like an accusation. "Time's up. The bank's patience has run out." "I need more time, Mr. Gable," Marcus said, standing on his porch, his posture straight, refusing to show the man the chasm of despair that had opened inside him. "Time is money, and you have neither," Gable sneered. He gestured vaguely at the peeling paint, the sagging gutter. "Besides, I heard you've been keeping strange company. The whole town is talking. Harboring a biker gang. Not a good look for a man asking for charity." The injustice of it stung more than the cold. His one act of decency was being twisted into a weapon against him. They were stranded. It was a blizzard. "Details, details." Gable waved a dismissive hand. "The point is, you're a risk. The bank is foreclosing. You have 30 days to vacate the premises." It's official. He tore a sheet from his clipboard and tacked it viciously to the door, right over the nail holes from the last notice. The white paper was a final, brutal declaration of his failure. Marcus watched him drive away, the clean tires of his car spraying mud over the porch steps. The next month was a slow-motion nightmare. The town's cold shoulder became a wall of ice. The owner of the diner where he'd hoped to wash dishes wouldn't even look him in the eye. The hardware store owner suddenly had no part-time work available. The rumor of the bikers had poisoned the well completely. He was not just poor, he was a pariah. The flickering kitchen light finally gave up, popping with a sad fizzle and plunging the evenings into deep, candle-lit gloom. Hope, once a dwindling ember, was now just cold ash. Defeated, Marcus retreated to the basement, a place he'd avoided. It was his father's domain, a place of ghosts and half-finished projects. He was looking for old wiring, anything he could salvage to fix the light, when Buster started acting strangely. The old dog, usually so placid, began whining and scratching insistently at the stone foundation wall, near the base of the chimney. "What is it, boy?" Marcus murmured, trying to pull him away. But Buster was resolute, pawing at one particular fieldstone. Curiosity piqued. Marcus ran his hand over the stone. Felt different, looser than the others. Using the pry bar from his father's old toolbox, he worked it free. It came away with a grating scrape, revealing not a secret passage, but a small, dark cavity. Heart-pounding, Marcus reached inside. His fingers brushed against cold metal. He pulled out a small, heavy box, rusted at the hinges. It was locked. He carried it upstairs into the fading afternoon light. After a moment of thought, he retrieved his father's old service knife, the one he kept on his mantelpiece. He used the tip to pry the lock open. The lid creaked open. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was not money or gold, but another, more ornate knife. A K-bar from the Vietnam era, and a single, folded letter, the paper yellowed with age. His hands trembled as he unfolded it. The letter was in his father's familiar script, addressed not to him, but to a man he'd never heard of. "To my brother, preacher," it began. Marcus's breath caught in his chest. He read on, the words painting a picture of a firefight in a jungle half a world away. His father wrote of being pinned down, wounded and certain of his death, until his brother in arms, a fearless sergeant the men called Preacher, had charged through enemy fire to drag him to safety. "He saved my life, plain and simple," his father wrote. "A debt I can never truly repay. If you are ever reading this, it means you have found my home. If you are ever in need, my family will honor my debt. They will give you whatever you ask. Your brother, Thomas Cole." Marcus sank into his chair, the letter shaking in his hand. Preacher. The biker. The coin in his pocket suddenly felt heavy as lead. He understood now, the long look at the photograph, the name, the marker. Preacher had been testing him. He had come to this house not as a random victim of a storm, but perhaps seeking the son of the man who had been his brother. And Marcus, without knowing any of it, had honored his father's debt not because he was told to, but because it was the right thing to do. The hope that bloomed in his chest was fierce and painful. They had said they paid their debts, but they were gone. The knowledge felt like a gift delivered to a grave. The 30th day arrived with the cold, clear light of a winter morning. It was the day of his eviction. Marcus stood on his porch, dressed in his old service uniform, the jacket a little tight across the shoulders. He hadn't worn it in years, but today he needed its armor. He was not going to be evicted as a failure, but as a soldier who had met his final defeat with honor. He held his father's service knife in his hand, not as a weapon, but as a link to the man who had taught him what integrity meant. Mr. Gable's sedan pulled up, followed by the county sheriff's car. Gable got out, his face radiating smug triumph. The sheriff, a man named Patterson whom Marcus had known since childhood, looked deeply uncomfortable. "Well, Marcus, all dressed up with nowhere to go," Gable said, savoring the moment. "Sheriff, you can serve the papers." Patterson approached slowly, his eyes full of pity. "Marcus, I'm sorry it's come to this." Marcus simply nodded, his jaw tight. He braced himself for the final humiliation. But just as the sheriff raised the eviction notice, a low rumble began to build in the distance. It wasn't a tractor or a truck. It was a deep, throaty growl that grew louder and louder, a sound of thunder on a clear day. Gable frowned, annoyed by the interruption. The rumble became a roar. Over the rise of the hill they appeared. First one, then two, then a dozen, then 50 motorcycles pouring down the road in a disciplined, awe-inspiring formation. They were the Iron Sentinels. They rode with a purpose that was anything but random, their chrome glinting in the morning sun. They filled the road, surrounding the small farmhouse in a protective ring of steel and leather. The entire chapter had returned. They cut their engines in unison, the sudden silence deafening. Preacher swung off his bike, his boots hitting the ground with authority. He wasn't wearing a helmet, and his face was set like granite. He ignored Gable completely, his eyes locked on Marcus. He walked straight up the porch steps, past the stunned sheriff, and stopped in front of the man in the uniform. He looked at the knife in Marcus's hand, then met his gaze. A slow, profound smile touched his lips. "Your father was a good man, son," Preacher said, his voice thick with emotion. "Looks like he raised one, too." He held out a thick manila envelope. "We don't leave family behind. And we always pay our debts." Marcus's hand shook as he took the envelope. Inside was a cashier's check. The amount written on it made his vision swim. It was enough to pay off the entire mortgage 3 times over. He looked up, speechless, tears welling in his eyes for the first time in 15 years. "What is the meaning of this?" Gable sputtered, his face turning a blotchy red. "This is a legal proceeding. You can't just—" Preacher turned to him, and the warmth in his eyes vanished, replaced by glacial ice. "This is a family matter," he growled. "And you are trespassing." He took a step toward Gable, and for the first time, Marcus saw the man who had charged through enemy fire. Gable physically recoiled, stumbling backward off the porch and into the mud. He scrambled back to his car, humiliated and utterly defeated, and sped away without a backward glance. The reversal was swift and absolute, but it was only the beginning. Preacher clapped a heavy hand on Marcus's shoulder. "Your father's house needs work, brother. Let's get to it." What followed was nothing short of a miracle. The Iron Sentinels were not thugs. They were veterans. They were electricians, plumbers, carpenters, and engineers. They swarmed the property with the disciplined efficiency of a military unit on a mission. Shingles were torn off the roof and replaced. A new furnace was carried into the basement, and the old one dismantled. Wires were pulled, pipes were soldered, and walls were painted. The flickering lights were replaced with warm, steady fixtures that filled every corner of the house with a golden glow. The pantry, once a monument to his poverty, was filled to bursting with food. They worked for 3 days straight, fueled by coffee and a sense of profound purpose. The town watched, stunned into silence. They saw the American flags flying from the bikes. They saw the crisp, respectful way the men spoke to Marcus. They saw them salute his uniform. The narrative of the dangerous biker gang crumbled, replaced by an undeniable truth. These were men of honor, and Marcus Cole was one of them. Sheriff Patterson, his face a mixture of shame and admiration, came by on the second day, not with papers, but with a box of donuts, and stayed for an hour, listening to Preacher tell stories about his and Marcus's father. The community's judgment had been weighed and found wanting. Their vindication was absolute. On the third evening, the work was done. The house stood proud and whole, a beacon of warmth against the winter landscape. The sentinels gathered in the yard with Marcus for a barbecue, the grill smoke rising like incense into the twilight. Preacher stood beside him, both men looking at the restored home. "Your father saved my life," Preacher said quietly. "He made me promise that if I ever made it back, I'd live a life worthy of the one he saved. We started this club for guys like us, guys who got left behind. We look after our own." He gestured to the laughing, talking men. "This is your family now, Marcus. This is your home." Months later, spring arrived in earnest. The farmhouse was alive. Marcus, with funding from the Sentinels Veterans Fund, had converted the barn into a community workshop. He spent his days teaching local kids, many from underprivileged homes, how to fix engines and work with their hands, his quiet patience and gentle strength earning him the nickname Chief. The Sentinels were regular visitors, their rumbling engines no longer a sound of fear in the town, but a welcome sign of family coming home. Buster, his tail always wagging now, had a dozen uncles to scratch his ears. Marcus was no longer the isolated, haunted veteran. He was the heart of a community, a man who had been rewarded not with charity, but with the fierce, unyielding loyalty he had first offered to strangers in a storm. He had learned that a home is not just a structure of wood and nails, but a fortress built from kindness, and that the truest family is the one you earn. The story of Marcus Cole reminds us that the greatest tests of our character often come when we have the least to give. It's in those moments that an act of selfless kindness can ripple outward, returning to us not as a simple repayment, but as a tidal wave of grace that can rebuild a life. If you believe in the power of loyalty and the strength of a found family, share this story and let it be a beacon for others.